I have in my possession a secret map by the planners of the New World Order.
Because the global order is changing again.
A new world order.
As you can see in the Daniel 11 hypothesis on biblicalresearchlabs.com, the first two kings of the North were Tsarist Russia and Soviet Russia, and the first two kings of the South were the United Kingdom, including the British Commonwealth and Germany, with the third king of the South being the United States, and the third king of the North, the Russian Federation, bringing us up to Daniel 11 verses 13 through 15, as well as Daniel 11:20, where the one who sends a raiser of taxes is the United Nations, and the raiser of taxes itself is the Paris Climate Accord. The one who sends a raiser of taxes being the same thing as the great horn of the he-goat in Daniel chapter 8 verse 8, which again is the United Nations, with the he-goat itself being symbolic of the shadow government of the Kenites. And once the great horn of the he-goat gets broken, which is the same word in the Hebrew translated as destroyed in Daniel 11:20, the United Nations will be replaced with the so-called New World Order, meaning the one world political system of Revelation 13 that won't come into being until Satan and his angels get cast to earth at the woe of the fifth trumpet. That's also when the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8 becomes the leopard of Daniel chapter 7, which is symbolic of the Kenites and their four hidden dynasties, providing the infrastructure of the one world system. It's also at the woe of the fifth trumpet that the Ezekiel 38 Confederacy, headed by Gog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, meaning most likely Moscow and Tobolsk, becomes the bear of Daniel chapter 7, with the lion being symbolic of the Christian nations up until just after the one world political system gets wounded to death, because that's when Satan appears as the Antichrist and most Christians get killed spiritually, causing the Christian nations to become non-Christian nations, which is why you see in Daniel chapter 7 verse 8 those three horns plucked up by the roots when Satan appears in Jerusalem as the Antichrist at the woe of the sixth trumpet. Satan's role of Antichrist being the little horn, little because he'll only be the Antichrist for 2.5 months, and the three horns plucked up by the roots are symbolic of Ephraim, Judah, and Manasseh, meaning the first three kings of the South according to the Daniel 11 hypothesis, which again are the United Kingdom, including the British Commonwealth, Germany, including Europe, because by that time Germany will have most likely filled in the post-Brexit power vacuum, and Manasseh, which is the United States, and those three horns are also symbolic of the three ribs in the mouth of the bear in Daniel chapter 7, but that also doesn't happen until the Christian nations become non-Christian nations at 666, meaning at the sixth seal, the sixth trumpet, and the sixth vial, when Satan appears in Jerusalem instead of Christ, which is what Antichrist means. Rewinding now back to Daniel 11 verses 13 through 15, and again the king of the north at this time and in these verses is the Russian Federation, and the king of the south is Manasseh, which is the United States. So keeping that in mind, verse 13 says, "For the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches." And September of 2015 was when the Russian Federation entered into Syria, and there's been full-blown animosity between Russia and the West ever since, which got even louder when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, but really it's the two warring factions of Kenites within the shadow government thereof, which again is symbolized by the he-goat of Daniel chapter 8, as nation continues to rise against nation, meaning the Kenite nation rising against itself through multipolar globalism versus unipolar globalism. The Kenites on the multipolar end of the globalist spectrum, for the most part, work through the Russian Federation, Edom in other words, while the unipolarist Kenites for the most part work through the left-right paradigm, which is really Stalinism and Trotskyism, which are symbolized by Ammon and Moab. But also within the left-right paradigm are the hidden agents of Edom working to introduce geopolitical disorder into internal American activity, encouraging all kinds of separatism and ethnic, social, and racial conflicts, actively supporting all dissident movements, extremist, racist, and sectarian groups, thus destabilizing internal political processes in the United United States, as the Russian propagandist Alexander Dugin wrote in the 1997 book Foundations of Geopolitics. And in 2022, Alexander Dugin's daughter, Daria Dugina, said, "We all understand that this conflict, meaning the conflict that began when Russia invaded Ukraine, is not between Russia and Ukraine. This conflict is between the two blocks of multipolarity and of the unipolarity. Unfortunately, Ukraine is being held as the life shield of the unipolar world." Then moving on to Daniel 11 verse 14, "And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south," which again is the United States at this time and at this point in the chapter. "Also the robbers of thy people," meaning the Kenites obviously, "shall exalt themselves to establish the vision," meaning the vision of a global government, "but they shall fall." And this word translated as fall here is from a word in the Hebrew, which in this case means to fail, because again, there will be no so-called New World Order until Satan and his angels get cast to earth at the woe of the fifth trumpet, which is when the United Nations gets replaced with the one world political system of Revelation 13 at the beginning of Daniel's 70th week, which was 7 years, but is now 5 months. "So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mound and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand." And again, the king of the south is the United States at this time and at this point in the chapter. "Neither his chosen people," meaning his elected officials, "neither shall there be any strength to withstand." And as you can see in the latest Mark 13 newsletter, and this is an excerpt from an article published by the KievIndependent.com on December 9th, 2025, the new U.S. National Security Strategy, published December 4th, 2025, stunned Washington's allies, casting doubt on the entire post-Cold War security order in Europe. The document takes a direct shot at the European Union and questions some of the main principles of NATO, two pillars of Europe's political and security architecture. It also signals a retreat from the U.S.-led unipolar world while refocusing on the Western Hemisphere. Despite the ongoing war in Ukraine, the document notably avoids criticism of Russia, which has already praised it as consistent with its own vision. And then that's followed with an excerpt from an article also published on December 9th on FirstPost.com, which says, "Decades after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, U.S. President Donald Trump has provided more reasons and justification for the world to move towards a multipolar order than at any time in the past. The United States counts here much more than the rest because it has since retained the leadership in what has become a unipolar world with no competition visible in the foreseeable future. But again, there will be no New World Order, as it's called, until the 5-month-long hour of temptation begins, when Satan and his angels get cast to earth at the woe of the fifth trumpet, because that's when the one world political system of Revelation 13 emerges, having 7 heads, which are symbolic of the 7 continents of the planet Earth, and 10 horns, which are symbolic of 10 fallen angel kings who are part of Daniel's exclusively supernatural 4th beast you can read of in Daniel chapter 7, along with the leopard, which again is symbolic of the Kenites and their 4 hidden dynasties, providing the infrastructure of the one world system, with the lion and the bear being the 4th king of the south and the 4th king of the north. And it's only when the 4 beasts of Daniel chapter 7 all rise up together at the woe of the fifth trumpet that the so-called New World Order comes into being, first as a one world political system, which then gets wounded to death, after which it becomes a one world religious system at the woe of the sixth trumpet, when Satan appears as the Antichrist, beginning the final 2.5 months of the 5-month-long hour of temptation, or 70 evenings, which are what the 70 years in captivity to the Babylon of old were a type of.
Let me warn you,
A new world order.
and let me warn the nation.
A new world order.
Let me warn you,
A new world order.
and let me warn the nation.
Now available on compact disc, the Biblical Research Lab's Radio Hour, all 17 broadcasts, including Before the Foundation of the World, The Return of the Fallen Angels, The Battles of Armageddon and Hamon-Gog, The 2 Beasts of Revelation 13, The Parable of the Fig Tree, The 3 Woe Trumpets of the Book of Revelation, The 7 Heads or 7 Mountains, The Shadow Government of the Generation of Vipers, Countdown to the Great Apostasy, Education, Economics, Politics, and Religion, 666, The New World Order, order and the identity of the Antichrist, the seal of God versus the mark of the beast, the three horns of Daniel 7, the appendixes to the Daniel 11 hypothesis, all these things are done in parables. For every positive there's a negative in the 75 days and the 70 evenings. Just email us at mark13records@mail.com or call 1-800-816-2432 or write us at P.O. Box 21461, Winston-Salem, North Carolina 27120. Fantastic, you'll enjoy it.